immediately to me, the word empathy jumps out. And when we think about how we function as human beings in our society, so much rests on our ability to be empathetic to the person next to us and to be empathetic to the group we're talking to. And where I found that there are highly empathetic groups of people, the inclusion feels like a natural byproduct almost of something that's foundational in the first place. And I've spent a long time thinking about the role of empathy in schools in particular, and looking at the research around whether we actually as a society have become less empathetic over time. And there's lots of arguments to suggest that we have, because of screen time, because of anonymity, because of that real kind of sense of kind of social um, reduction in levels of empathy. And so for me, when we think about inclusive spaces and our ability to be empathetic, if that's already ground down, we're less likely to be inclusive of others. We're less likely to put ourselves in their places. So yeah, to me, empathy is the first foundation, I think.
I was going to say the same word, and I think the research from the Empathy Lab shows that empathy is, in the vast majority of cases, a teachable skill, which I think is really important if we're talking about the value of empathy, to recognize and remember that that's something that is learnable. I think the model that we take when we talk about inclusive spaces in my work, the foundations that we talk about are empathy and understanding, followed by policy and procedure. And that empathy and understanding, I think, is so important because educators working in schools, in order to create inclusive educational spaces, they need to first understand why some people won't feel included automatically. And there's various reasons for that. In a sense, I think they need to understand exclusion and build empathy with that experience before they can start to create inclusion. So I guess really it's about that empathy that Bennie talked about, is about knowing that why conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion matter. I think I work a lot with very well-intentioned educators who have never considered the experience of different marginalized groups. And when I share my story and my experience with them, it helps them to understand why, and it helps them to build that understanding and that empathy. I think in a way, hearing the lived experiences of different people whose experiences are different to our own can help to humanize the challenge that we're talking about and build that empathy and inclusion, which I think, as Bennie said, is that foundation. I mean, I think that, like I said, beyond that, we then need to think about policy and procedure and what that comes into. But I suppose people recognizing that not everybody will feel included in society and in school communities automatically, and thinking, so what are we going to do to consciously construct a community where they do? I guess that question is the foundation of an inclusive space.
Okay, well, funnily enough, I was going to talk about empathy later, but of course it's key. And just from what you're saying there, it struck me immediately about why Libby's stories have touch so many people's hearts, because they give a lived experience of what it's like to live with a condition where you're mainly spend your life being misunderstood. And I think we have to be honest and accept how hard it is to feel that cognitive empathy. I think we all have that kind of more affective empathy where we see something being hurt and we say, oh, that's awful. But that cognitive empathy, that ability to actually step into someone else's shoes and think about what that might feel, I find it really hard. And I think we all do, I think we all do. But what does help us is absolutely hearing those lived experiences. So I really sort of back that up. And I think understanding that difference between affective empathy and cognitive empathy is quite important. I've looked at it a lot through the lens of neurodivergence, because there's a myth that neurodivergent people, autistic people, don't feel empathy. And it's a horrible myth that's gone on a long time, and it leads to a lot of stereotyping. And whilst there may be some challenges with the cognitive empathy side, I would say we all have that. And the more you look at neurodivergence without at all minimizing the struggles and the challenges of being autistic, for example, you do see that these are very human traits, but it's more the intensity and the kind of clustering of those traits and how they affect everyday life. Certainly, when my daughter speaks about empathy, you see that she actually feels it. It's like another sensory. There's a proper name for it, and I can't think what it is, but she feels probably more than anyone else feels. She can pick up the slightest hint of annoyance in me, even if I feel I'm completely covering it. She can tune in, she can feel what I'm feeling, she can see things through my eyes. And I think a younger autistic child couldn't tell us this. A non-verbal autistic person, you know, unless they're off, which they often are, to be fair, able to write, couldn't tell us. But now we've moved into this world where people can share their lived experiences much more easily online. They can, you know, get together and talk about these things. So we can learn much more about those lived experiences.